The artificial intelligence takeoff is here. ChatGPT can finish your homework or pass a law exam. AI-generated music means you can get Kanye West to cover the plain white tees or create a Drake tune from scratch. I do recommend you look that one up. And now, artificial intelligence can even make beer adverts like this one. Now, the version I've seen of this going around, I think, has Smash Mouth in the background. We can't play the music for the purposes of YouTube. But as you can see here, none of these people are real. This advert was completely generated by AI, I presume by looking at other beer adverts and basically following all the tropes of those. As you can tell, I mean, if you've been looking at AI videos on the internet, the big problem they have is with hands. And clearly here, a big problem they have is from drinking. So AI hasn't quite worked out yet which side of the bottle a person would drink from. But you can see, work still to be done, but that's a lot of progress from where we were a year ago. The speed of AI development has some influential people incredibly concerned, though. This was a headline in the New York Times this week. The godfather of AI leaves Google and warns of danger ahead. For half a century, Geoffrey Hinton nurtured the technology at the heart of chatbots like ChatGPT. Now he worries it will cause serious harm. Geoffrey Hinton was a computer scientist at the University of Toronto who first developed the neural network model of artificial intelligence. Neural networks enable computers to process data in a way that is inspired by the human brain. It's one type of machine learning and forms the backbone of AI models like ChatGPT. So that's why everyone is very interested in this guy. The MIT spoke to him about the concerns that led to him leaving Google, which he did only very recently. So the MIT write this. As companies improve their AI systems, he believes they become increasingly dangerous. Quote, look at how it was 5 years ago and how it is now, he said of AI technology. Take the difference and propagate it forwards. That's scary. Until last year, he said Google acted as a proper steward for the technology, careful not to release something that might cause harm. But now that Microsoft has augmented its Bing search engine with a chatbot challenging Google's core business, Google is racing to deploy the same kind of technology. The tech giants are locked in a competition that might be impossible to stop, Dr. Hinton said. His immediate concern is that the internet will be flooded with false photos, videos, and text, and the average person will not be able to know what is true anymore. Down the road, he is worried that future versions of the technology pose a threat to humanity because they often learn unexpected behavior from the vast amounts of data they analyze. This becomes an issue, he said, as individuals and companies allow AI systems not only to generate their own computer code, but actually run that code on their own. And he fears a day when truly autonomous weapons, those killer robots, become reality. So all very concerning stuff. One more quote from him. He said, the idea that this stuff could actually get smarter than people, a few people believe that, but most people thought it was way off, and I thought it was way off. I thought it was 30 to 50 years or even longer away. Obviously, I no longer think that. So this is a guy who knows his stuff, very, very concerned. As well as speaking to the MIT since leaving Google, he's spoken to CNN. He was asked what kind of regulation might be needed to avoid the risks he's warning of.
I'm not an expert on how to do regulation. I'm just a scientist who suddenly realized that these things are getting smarter than us. And I want to sort of blow the whistle and say we should worry seriously about how we stop these things getting control over us. And it's going to be very hard. And I don't have the solutions. I wish I did.
Does there need to be a meeting of all of the tech groups and governments working on this, Google, China, whatever, and some sort of set of rules of the road? I mean, how do we even protect against bad actors or rogue nations harnessing AI?
So for some things, it's very hard, like them using AI for manipulating electorates or for fighting wars with robot soldiers. But for the existential threat of AI taking over, we're all in the same boat. It's bad for all of us. And so we might be able to get China and the US to agree on things like that. It's like nuclear weapons. If there's a nuclear war, we all lose. And it's the same if these things take over. So since we're all in the same boat, we should be able to get agreement between China and the US on things like that.
Do you think that tech companies will be the solution, or are they so invested in this financially, and also, let's be frank, in terms of power, that they're not going to be part of the solution here?
I think the tech companies are the people most likely to be able to see how to keep this stuff under control.
We can talk about his analysis that the tech companies are going to be the people most likely to keep this under control in a moment. First of all, though, James, I know we've been speaking today about this. We disagree on whether AI might pose an existential threat. I'm quite persuaded that it's something we should be at least concerned about, especially when you've got people such as Geoffrey Hinton leaving his job so he can talk about it. You're, as far as I understand it, more of the perspective that this is just science fiction. It's not a real possibility that we need to take seriously, that the AI could end up, well, I think taking control is a weird way of putting it, but could end up posing existential threats to humanity, let's say.
There's a list of things of varying degrees of things to be very concerned about. What I've particularly, I think this is kind of my argument, and it's the one that other people who work in AI, Meredith Whittaker is one of the founders of Google's Open Research Unit back in the day. There's various people around who say similar things about the risks involved here, but they don't pick up on some of the things that Geoffrey Hinton was talking about, which is, or rather the media has really picked up on, which is like this very distant thing about existential risks. The risks right now, and perhaps this is what he might mean by, AI taking over and putting us under control and all that sort of thing. The risks right now are things like algorithmic discrimination, that you build in forms of racism and sexism into the new technologies that you have. The risk right now is that you actually have these very, very large companies like Google or Microsoft or Facebook or Amazon or whoever that are developing and implementing these systems and using them to reinforce their market power, their control over the technologies that we use, because this is how you make money out of this. I mean, do bear in mind the AI technology we have today. I mean, AI is a bit of a PR term really in these sort of circumstances. The AI technology we have today is an extension of what these companies are already doing. It is based on the massive collection of as much data as possible, and then the very fast processing of that data and the working out of correlations from that data. And then, you go and set up a model that looks like it can produce, actually, I think, quite a funny video, a spoof of a beer advert, or have a nice conversation with on ChatGPT or whatever. And these things are impressive to us, but it's a long way from really thinking about intelligence. It's an extension of the kinds of technologies that we've all got used to with the internet and with this sort of ubiquitous web, and the fact we've all got smartphones that can do all these things over a long period of time. Now, that technology as applied will reinforce the problems we have with that technology of very large corporate capture, corporate control, not necessarily well regulated, all sorts of then political influences that start to come in that Geoffrey Hinton actually hinted at there. That, I think, is where the real problem is. And it's also, I think, where there's a degree that sometimes with people talking about what's happening with AI, they talk about it as a technology completely separate from what is happening in the rest of the world, from how the economy is organized, how society is organized. That floats free, and then one day it might come up with a supercomputer that will kill us all for its own purposes. And you saw that, I think, with Geoffrey Hinton saying, well, actually, perhaps the big tech companies are part of the solution here. Well, I think we need to be a bit more strict about this. And I was very interested to see, just a few hours ago, Lena Khan, who is the US chair of the Federal Trade Commission, the watchdog in the US that's supposed to keep an eye on things like big tech companies and to preserve competition and this sort of thing. Lena Khan, one of the more impressive people in the Biden administration, actually been quite activist about taking on some of these companies, coming out with a big list of what the administration would like to do, what she would like to see done on some of the more day-to-day, immediate, this is happening right now concerns with artificial intelligence, like discrimination, like the fact that, it's now so easy to generate fraudulent emails or to do deepfakes or to do various other things that can be used to defraud people, essentially, that you have these technologies under the control of very large corporations. And she cites directly the experience of the last nearly 20 years now of big data and how it's changed society and how we've suffered from the ways in which that wasn't regulated and how it's been applied to us. So that, I think, was a more promising way, a more useful way to think about some of the issues here, because it starts to get into the real problem, which is not so much the technology itself, but the relationship of that technology with capitalist structures that we all have to live with anyway.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I agree with lots of that in terms of those should all be concerns. I suppose, I think what Geoffrey Hinton is saying is quite specific and very different to other technologies, which I think, many of the arguments you've made could be said about many a technology because it's about how people use them. There's something different about AI, which is that it is self-improving. It can act recursively. So the difference between how AI deals with data and how, say, Facebook deals with data, let's say, is that you are having a model, these neural networks, which Geoffrey Hinton created, which are being fed loads and loads and loads of data, And it's not then that they pump out an algorithm that the computer scientist understands. It's that they can complete tasks without anyone understanding what's gone on. So it's a real black box. So
that's been a problem. No, that's been a problem with big data analysis for a long period of time. The issue of interactability, that because the data sets are so big and because your computer's so fast at analyzing them, it's not really possible to know how it draws a connection from one place to another. And you get versions of this all the time. That the very targeted advertising that Facebook and, for example, will try and sell companies, which will start to pick out the interconnections between different sets of people behaving in different ways. Now, it's not easy to see what those connections might be. Why somebody with these particular characteristics also is somebody who wants to shop in this particular way. These things are not tractable, right? You can't actually sit down and work out from point A to point B. But what you've got with what we're calling artificial intelligence is an extension of that principle. And that starts to sound like that, yes, you can start to create, we can create a kind of theoretical possibility in the future where we have such a fast, powerful version of this machine, perhaps writing or, if you like, coding another machine that can be even faster and more powerful than that. But because the underlying technology stays the same, it's kind of the economics you run into that's the problem here. There are limits, and we are approaching some of those limits to how the current technology we have for building silicon chips and building blocks, the physical building blocks of this, how much improvement we can expect to get out of these things over the next few years. Geoffrey Moore, founder of Intel, who died probably a couple of weeks ago, famous for Moore's Law, the idea that the number of transistors on a chip will double every year or so. So you get these huge improvements, like 50 years. That's starting to run out. The technologies are running into barriers here. Very interesting reports in the specialist press, not so much in the wider media, in The Information, for instance, a couple of weeks ago, that AI startups were starting to be rationed by providers of web servers because they were all trying to use so much computing power that they were having to put limits on how much is available if you go to Amazon Web Services to AI companies. Similar problems with the supply of the GPUs that are used to do the data analysis for these very, very large data collection processes that machine learning relies on. All of these things are the kind of resource constraints that are hitting, problems with the energy consumption now of data servers. If we have existing technologies, and something that's like that is what we're going to get a real supercomputer out of, this super intelligent thing, it's going to require huge resource use. If it's going to require huge resource use, there are now already appearing competitions for scarce resources over this. So that's a limit, I think, on what is plausible under the kind of current organization and society that we have.
But isn't the problem here that we don't know what that limit is, right? And so I'm not an expert on the computing power it takes to develop generative AI. But I presume that Geoffrey Hinton is more of an expert than either you or I. And it seems that he has been shocked at the speed at which AI has been able to develop capacities that we thought would be a long way off. And we've been able to do that, obviously, within the resource constraints that we currently have. Otherwise, we wouldn't have done it. So it doesn't seem to me that we're going to be able to very well predict, we will need X resources to create superintelligence. Because also what you're getting is these programs which are coding other programs or coding other machines, and we don't know how efficient they're going to be when it comes to energy consumption. So I take your point that it might be that we hit a resource limit before these AIs are able to get smarter than us.
We're already hitting the resource limit.
You what, sorry?
We're already hitting resource limits and these things. Like there's a semiconductor shortage. There's the shortage of server space.
There's a difference between there being shortages and hitting limits, right? Because clearly what Geoffrey Hinton is saying and where he's coming from and what I find very persuasive is he's saying we've come a lot further in a much shorter space of time than we imagined. And it could be the case that we go much further in a much shorter space of time than we imagined again. That's what he's saying. Like, look how far we've come in 3 years. Imagine how far we'll go in a year. Obviously, these things, because of the nature of a smart machine coding a smart machine, there could be a sort of exponential speed up here because you're getting smart things coding smart things, recursive in that sense. And so that's why I don't really have any confidence that, don't worry, before it gets super intelligent and intelligent enough to outsmart us. And again, we should be clear, it's not that the bot becomes evil. The argument is about misalignment. So you might ask, the classic example is a paperclip. So you ask a machine to make as many paperclips as possible. It decides that it's going to try and melt down everything in existence so it can make paperclips. And it realizes that we're not going to be happy with that. So it preempts us turning off the machine by killing us all, right? So it might sound far-fetched, but that's the idea of misalignment theory, right? So before we get to that period where they can outsmart us, and then it's difficult to stop them because they're smarter than us. I have no confidence we'll hit the resource constraint first. Neither does this guy, who to me, I can't see what his ulterior motive would be to be sounding this alarm. And again, I suppose I'd go back to your point about, I don't think it's just the media picking up on this existential thing, because it is people who've been working in this, who've been talking about this for years, actually. It's only now the media have been picking it up. And it seems to me it's people high up in these companies that have been more concerned about this than the political class and mainstream media.
You can start from where we are now and sort of create a world. You've just done it, where everything's gone bad because the computer has done something unexpected that is bad for the rest of us. Now, there are versions of this already happening. You remember just a few years ago when there was an attempt to compensate for the fact that schools were locked down by using an algorithm to generate the A-level and GCSE results that the students were supposed to have got. And it turned out this was just biased and terrible and was giving people results that were better if you happened to go to a private school for no other reason than you were a private school, right? This is what was coming out of the thing. It's a small version of what is already happening. And this is where the issue of but what if this terrible thing happens in the future? It's a bit, you get like this with climate change. It's like, what if this terrible thing happens in the future? It is already happening. These terrible things are already happening. We should deal with the terrible things that are already happening. And in dealing with those terrible things, in starting to say, well, how can we put under some sort of public supervision and control the development of these particular data techniques and these machine learning techniques that is not necessarily. And I think when George has said this, he's kind of right. It's the process of competition that Google is scared of Microsoft, so they're having to charge at this and put loads and loads of money and time and effort and resources into it. That process of competition, driving this in a chaotic way, what can we do that starts to put some public control, some democratic accountability, as much supervision as we can, have a serious society-wide conversation about how we start to use these things and potentially use them for all sorts of really good, exciting purposes. The invention of new drugs, the invention of far more efficient ways to use the resources we have is something that AI could be and big data could be particularly good at. That we can do that if we start to get in our heads that we need to challenge the structures that are investing in and applying and using these new technologies. And that means having to, at the very least, think about regulation now, not because of the existential risk, which I can write a kind of science fiction story about how this might happen in the future. I've tried to give you a sort of, if you like, economist version of why this is quite implausible given the technologies that we have. But what we really have to deal with is that issue of corporate power and the fact you have decisions over these things made by really quite a limited number of institutions globally with very limited real public control and oversight. And if we don't start to deal with this, then the kind of problems we saw with the development of things like Facebook and all the other big tech, big data companies from the early 2000s onwards, they will reproduce themselves in a much more dramatic and unpleasant fashion through machine learning and the application of machine learning. That to me seems like something to really focus on now and potentially then think about existential risk rather than the immediate existential risk, oh my God, we'll have a computer, it'll run off and kill us all. Right? The problem is capitalism. The problem isn't the computer directly.